we had a lot of interesting things going on in the 80s. Had the Greenham Common women, and I read with fascination and confusion, being a male, of course, that a lot of women going out there and putting away their jobs, their lives, their families to this political ideal, were making intellectual decisions to take female partners, not emotional ones, but taking can you imagine a man making an intellectual decision to live with a man? Maybe there is a world where that would happen, but I think men are driven far more by different things than women are. This was the sort of thing that got me interested in this whole gender thing, and I thought that might be a more interesting focus for a work on dystopia, because I'd had this idea about 1909, about this future world, but it then became clear to me when the government at the time introduced this incredible thing called Clause 28 in 1988. I was in teaching then, so I was actually on a course looking at the promotion of literature that raised a bigger gender agenda, if you like, pardon me, saying gender agenda. And we were on this course at the English Centre in Ebury Street. Those who've been in education will know it well. And then, a couple of weeks later, this Clause 28 thing came out. I could not believe it, I really couldn't. It was part of the Local Government Act, and it was Section 28, which it prohibited local authorities from, in inverted commas, because it was their term, clearly not the way we might use it, promoting homosexuality or gay pretended family relationships. Think of that now. We have same-sex marriages now. Pretended family relationships. That is in the statute book, or it was. Thankfully it was changed in 2003, but it ran for 15 years. And a lot of gay people said it made them feel like second-class citizens under a deeply offensive law. But more importantly, I didn't get to finish my course. I had another 2 weeks to go. But on the serious things, why would you criticise love between two people? There's something wrong. I mean, that's madness, isn't it? And that's in my lifetime. I'd have to go back to H.G. Wells to find that kind of madness. It's happening in my lifetime. I thought, well, okay, let's flip it. Let's think about a world where sexual relations, a relationship of any kind, between a man and a woman is illegal. Not just illegal, but punishable by death. That was my starting point for 1909. So I'm going to enjoy this, because I'm going to really get into the nuts and bolts of what it might mean if we talk about heterosexuality being wrong. And why had no one written about it before? So if they had, probably 1,000 women had written about it but not been able to get their books published. It seemed like a real wake-up moment. It was something that had come out of my own practice. So it wasn't just a floating idea. I'd actually been moved in that direction. I'm going to read you just a brief passage from the end of this. It's actually not that brief, it's a couple of sides, so bear with me. But this is about, obviously, a world where women, I'm not going to give too much away in the hope that you might get yourself a copy, but relationships, obviously, between men and women are illegal, and so pregnancy, can you think of anything more horrific? It just doesn't happen. That the way children are, well, the way children come about, as you might see, is nothing to do with that. So you can imagine a woman, and women, of course, are, in this book, they are the ruling class. Men are the underclass. So there's another little flip. So she goes to her friend, Ricassa, the woman we heard in the first, right at the beginning of the talk. She goes to her friend because she's concerned about her being ill. And of course, no one would understand what that might mean, and not in this world. And they have these splints, which, if you're urine on, they will tell anything about you. They'll tell like what you're thinking, where you live, all these kind of things. It's like obviously we're a lot in the future. So she just gives the sample and gives it to her friend to analyse, and this is obviously, as you can see, the end of the book nearly, where the moment is revealed. Landa had been nodding, this is her friend, until she looked back at the splint. She studied it curiously, fascinated by the glowing hue it had assumed. She took a deep breath and stood up, her surprise turning to an expression of distaste. Ricassa stood up with her, blocking the path she seemed to want to take. "What's the matter? Am I sick?" "You must be," she said, pushing past her. Ricassa hurried down the corridor after her. "Where's your phone? Who are you phoning, Landa? What's happened?" "You're pregnant. That's what happened." "I don't even want to think about it." She pushed open the door to each room until she reached the bedroom. She walked round the bed as if it were teeming with bacteria and grabbed the phone. Ricassa threw herself at it, pulling it free from her grasp and out of the wall socket. "I'm infertile, you crazy bitch," she said. You were there when they used to taunt me, don't you remember? You even helped me once when I got into a fight over it." "You didn't have the operation," Landa said. "They didn't think you needed it. But you were right, you obviously are a late developer. If they'd known what was going to develop, you'd have probably not have been allowed to develop at all. Now, are you going to let me use the phone? Who are you going to ring?" Ricassa's eyes were wide, her face wet. "A friend. Someone I know might be able to save your career." "Are you sure? It's only a little stick after all." "This little stick, as you put it, is the most accurate medical phenomenon there's ever been. Urine can show everything about your workings of the bodies, all timed. This implement shows up anything that's wrong with you. From the depth of colour here, I'd say the pregnancy must be about 8 weeks. No wonder your bladder's been affected. Have you told anyone else about the symptoms?" "No, well, only Morda." "Morda? You've been having sexual intercourse with an activist? Someone who's cold-bloodedly killed women?" "He's never killed a woman. Look, I can't expect you to understand, Landa. You've been very kind to come round, but perhaps you'd better go now." Landa looked in disbelief at her friend's drawn features. She'd always been bodily different, but the sexual act, and with a man? It was the most perverse and corrupt act she could imagine, allowing the genitals of a man to come into contact with her. From the fading curiosity in her teenage years, she viewed the whole sensual enterprise with disgust. It was the profound disgust she felt now, wearily hardened by 5 years of medical training and 7 years of practice, of hormone programs, stitching and prescriptions for creams and tablets. It was the first time one of those sticks had diagnosed a betrayal of their sex. "You must get rid of it," Landa said as she stood at the door. "But I never had the chance to have a child." "You're a woman of 28, not a child. There may be complications, not least with your work. In a few weeks it's going to show. Not only that, but this child would have a living father. I tell you, you better get rid of it before he finds out, if you're likely to see him again." Ricassa took her friend's arm and held it. "Not a word of this to anyone, Landa. Can I trust you?" "For now, yes. But it's a heavy thing to keep quiet. Just try and phone me at home for the end of the week. My number's on the card. Remember, as every day passes, it will become more and more difficult to hide." Ricassa released the catch and let her out. She waved as she passed the security camera at the front of the block. Ricassa turned and went back to the bedroom, her face pale, her eyes wet.
And Martin's mining a rich seam of dystopic fiction there with the attitude towards sex of the kind of authorities, because obviously we know in 1984, and indeed in We, you get the state very much wanting to control the whole process and determine how much fun people are allowed to have in order to, as in the case of 1984, sublimate that energy and put it into worship of the state instead. So that's one of the characteristics of dystopian fiction. There's a few others which obviously are prevalent, things like compliance is monitored and enforced by the state, conformism, it's enforced against individuality. So for example, in Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 and his short story The Pedestrian, you see the mere act of walking is almost viewed as seditious and an indication of an individual mentality which the state does not want to see. Similarly, the state doesn't want to see human relations to include loyalty. The dystopian state will destroy the concepts of family loyalty and replace them with the superior loyalty to the state. And actually in some societies in the past, in the 20th century, that actually did happen and was the case. So you find people betraying their nearest and their dearest. When people want to rebel against that, in dystopian fiction, often it's the role of women to inspire men to turn thought into action and to lead the men into forsaking compliance in favour of an emotional life that's banned by the state. So the females in these dystopian novels are often more in tune with a sense of right and wrong and prepared to listen to that inner sense against the dystopian forces around them. And that, as I say, is a theme that emerges in 1984 and Fahrenheit 451, and indeed in Martin's own book, 1909. So finally, you could say history also is shaped by the state. We mocks the past. The ancient things are ridiculed, as if it's ridiculous to have chaos and being able to do whatever you like. Fahrenheit 451 burns all record of the past, while 1984 actually controls, changes the past on an ongoing basis. So if they don't like this meeting, suddenly the record of the meeting is expunged, and all the people who expunged it then expunge it from their own memories, and it's a constant ongoing process. So Orwell perhaps made the most stark and detailed warning of where the dystopian world can take us. But it's taken us now to the end of our speaking, as it were. We've done a lot of talking, and we'd like to hear perhaps if anyone has any views to share with us or any questions they want to ask us, we'd be delighted to hear them from you.